I'd like to thank everyone for showing up today. This is our element G, contractor management. And someone mentioned that we talked briefly about contractor management before. Again, that was just an element C. This is the more detailed version. Let's get started. So our course objectives for today, we'd like to make you familiar with the legal framework for the contractor management. We'd like you to understand the responsibilities of an employer to qualify contractors. We also would like you to understand the responsibility of an employer to orientate their contractors. One more responsibility to appoint a coordinator to oversee your contractor activities, and then identify and understand the OSSE audit requirements so that you can get your audit. Our topics for today, we have 6 of them. The first one is the introduction to contractors. The next one is the regulatory requirements. Lesson 3 is the contractor selection policy. Lesson 4 is the contractor orientation. Lesson 5 is the designated project coordinator to oversee your contractor activities. And lesson 6 is understanding the relevancy of the process to your OSSE audit requirements. So let's get started with lesson 1. First, we need to cover some background terms. So we need you all to be on the same page when we talk about contractors. So we are going to cover who is a contractor, who is a labor contractor, the labor contractor categories, when is a contractor considered your employee, who is a service contractor, and who is a prime contractor. We want to get these terms nailed down pretty closely before we get on with the other courses. So who is a contractor? The definition is an independent entity that agrees to furnish a set of quantity of goods, material, equipment, personnel, or services meeting a stated specification at a mutually agreed upon price and within a specified time frame to a client. And this can include temporary workers, service providers, and/or major construction activities. If your business hires contractors, it's important to ensure that they are not considered to be your workers. And the reason for this is because if you're not careful, you can be charged with the claims that are associated with injuries to your contractors. If you hire workers through a labor contractor and you direct their work, you could be considered to be their employer. The translation, this means you would be responsible for them as their employer and you'd be required to pay the premiums for their WorkSafe coverage. Coincidentally, if they're not covered, you'd still be eligible for the claims costs. Next, we have labor contract categories. There's 3 categories. First, the contractor that supplies only labor. An example of this is you hiring or calling a temp agency for a receptionist because yours is sick. In this case, you just receive the labor. The second version is a contractor that supplies labor and minor materials. Example of this would be hiring someone to check your fire extinguishers. The person might produce small items to facilitate his work. And the last one is contractor that supplies labor and a piece of major equipment. An example of this is hiring someone with a snowplow to clear your yard or dig a ditch in the back of your property. So when are labor contractors actually your workers? So if they do not operate as an independent business and are either not eligible for WorkSafe BC or they decline to purchase optional coverage. Remember that all sole proprietors do not have to have WorkSafe BC coverage. If you are hiring a sole proprietor, you have to make a decision on how he's going to be covered and whether you're going to cover his expense. If they are contracted only or primarily to you, they will be deemed to be your employee. Service contractors. These are any individuals or companies that provide a service to your organization. And the typical ones are window cleaners, equipment service technicians, office cleaning, and sometimes first aid services. If the individual or company is not registered with WorkSafe BC, they are going to be considered your worker while they're on your premises. And this is critical for you to understand because if you hire a person for one day to wash your windows and they fall off that ladder, that can be a very expensive claim. Next on the list is prime contractors. And I'd like to cover this from two angles. So as a business owner, if we said that you were going to hire a contractor to build a new maintenance shop on your site, you might hire a general contractor to be your prime contractor. He will organize the safety on that site and deal with the subcontractors for electrical and plumbing and concrete and other contractors. The prime contractor becomes responsible for all activities on the contract, including the health and safety and public liability for that site. Now, some of you have companies that provide services as contractors to other contractors. Now, in that situation, you want to make sure that you are following the proper process as far as your responsibilities to the prime contractor. So you need to make sure you know where your responsibilities lie. Also, unless a prime contractor has been determined in writing for your project, your company will be the prime contractor. So in my previous example, if you did not specify that the general contractor was the prime contractor, you would be by default, and you would assume all liability for injury and liabilities for that site. I'd like to remind you that if your company provides services as a subcontractor, it's best to avoid becoming prime contractor and avoiding all the liability issues, unless you clearly understand the responsibilities and how to deal with them. This is why we have a Contractor Safety Management Program. In our previous elements, we've initiated loss control measures and injury reduction for your direct employees. And now what we need to do is broaden this out to include everyone that's going to be on your site. And in order to do that, we need to establish a process that will manage risks related to the use of contractors. This is going to provide consistency in direction for managing your contractor safety. It's going to help protect your employees and the contractor employees from workplace injury and occupational illness and losses associated with incidents related to the activities of a contractor on your site. We've developed a 4-step model for a contractor management program. And there's 4 basic steps. First, the pre-contract planning. Second, the training and orientation for your contractors. Third step is the monitoring and enforcement to ensure that your expectations are met. And lastly, a post-contract evaluation to see how well you did. For the pre-contract planning, you want to create safety specifications and requirements for all your contractors. You want to ask to see evidence of their safety programs, required certifications. You want to get clearance letters to ensure they have WorkSafe BC coverage. Remember, if they do not have coverage, you are providing it. You want to choose a contractor based on multiple criteria, including his health and safety performance. The selected contractor may be requested to attend a pre-contract meeting to determine who's going to take care of what, and the meeting should be documented for your program. So let's just review this briefly. We need to make sure you clearly understand who is responsible for the employees on your site. As an owner of the business, you need to understand that you will be held responsible by default for any injury and liability unless the contractor has coverage. You also need to understand who has responsibility for supervision and inspection. So our first polling question for today is everyone comfortable with the terms used in Lesson 1? And we'll give you a minute to respond. Great. Everyone's on track so far, so let's move on. Lesson 2, regulatory requirements. These are from WorkSafe BC, the Workers' Compensation Act, and the Occupational Health and Safety Regulation. First, every owner of a workplace must provide and maintain the owner's land and premises that are being used as a workplace in a manner that ensures the health and safety of persons at or near the workplace. And a key part here is this includes visitors. We need to make sure that they are given the required information to identify and eliminate or control hazards to the health and safety of persons at the workplace. Again, this is something that's specific to your site, needs to be shared with your contractors. And lastly, we need to comply with this part of the regulation and any requirements from WorkSafe BC. Remember, where there are more than 2 employers working on the same site, a written agreement should identify the prime contractor. If there is no written agreement, the owner is considered to be the prime contractor. Employers retain the responsibility for the health and safety of their own workers, even though there is a prime contractor present. The prime contractors have overall responsibility for the health and safety on the worksite on the construction project. And this is one of the reasons why on concurrent work sites, a lot of times the project will have a construction fence around it. It clearly identifies whose responsibility lies where. So let's continue with the prime contractor responsibilities. The prime contractor needs to coordinate the occupational health and safety activities of all employers, workers, and everyone else at the workplace. And they need to establish and maintain procedures to ensure that the requirements of the workplace are followed by all parties. For those that deal with the prime contractor situations, there's a very good resource on the WorkSafe BC website. We'll also share a copy on our Learning Center website. And this is just a checklist for prime contractors, and includes things like notice of project and when they need to be filed. So again, if you're not familiar with these requirements and you are being asked to be a prime contractor, you should consult them before you sign on to that duty. So just a short review again. Failure to manage contractors can lead to injuries, claim costs, liabilities, and penalties. Do not forget to include visitors in your orientation process. Remember that as a result of additional contractor personnel, first aid and safety committee requirements can change. This is one of the things that a lot of companies get stuck with. They have existing first aid set up for their existing workforce. If a contractor shows up and adds 10 more people to the site, now your first aid requirements could have changed. Also, for those that have open houses for their facilities, having an additional 30 visitors on your site can affect your first aid coverage that you're responsible for. So be aware of that. You are prime contractor unless you have assigned it in writing to another party. So our next polling question. Do we understand why contractor management is something that has serious impact on your business? We'll give you a minute to answer that. Good. That means we can move on. Lesson 3, Contractor Selection Policy. The concept behind this is that it establishes a consistent qualification for your contractors and liability protection for your company. In your selection policy that you develop, there should be a requirement to be in good standing with WorkSafe BC. There should also be a requirement for liability insurance. Depending on your size of your operation and the complexity of the process, the liability insurance is stated by you, and it could vary between $1 and $10 million of liability for your contractors. Requirement to follow WorkSafe BC regulations is another added thing that's required. Remember, there is a requirement to inspect your contractor activities. On this next slide is just the start of a sample policy that we've included on the website for you to refer to. And this just gives you an idea of what a sample contractor management policy will look like. And this is not complete. This is just so you can recognize it when you see it on the website. Again, it's on the Learning Center. So for Lesson 3 review on your contractor selection policy, it needs to have on it that your contractors have WorkSafe BC coverage. It also documents their liability coverage, and it confirms the requirement to follow regulations. And one more time, there is a sample for you to view on the website. Our next polling question. Does everyone understand the legal requirement to provide safety on the worksite? and we'll give you a minute to check that out. Great. We're doing good so far. On to lesson 4, contractor training and orientation. The concept behind this is that it establishes a consistent communication of company policies, procedures, and site-specific hazards. There's 3 approaches to training. The first one, especially on a greenfield type application, the contractor can have their own occupational health and safety program, and their staff has a documented training in the program. They can simply go to that greenfield site and run their own show inside their own boundary. That's the first opportunity. The next one, your company provides a contractor safety manual and training to the contractor company, and the contractors are responsible for training their employees on your applicable safety policies and site requirements. Remember that they should have proof of training and also should be evaluated annually to make sure it's current. The last option is your company provides contractor safety training to your contractors' workers as they arrive on site prior to starting work. And again, that policy should be reviewed annually as well to make sure it's current. Remember that the training can be done by a designated trainer or by a work supervisor, and you can separate the sessions for contract supervisors and employees if you want to be more direct with the employees instead of the supervisors. Remember, it's key that you keep all records of all training and include the topics covered, including signatures and dates that it's being conducted. Remember, under training and orientation, that we should do this prior to the start of any work. And all contract employees working on site should have completed this contractor health and safety orientation provided by the client, including the sign-off on the orientation checklist. Topics that the orientation can include are things like site safety requirements, first aid, fire safety, site safety rules, site hazards, site housekeeping, and incident reporting. Remember that only contract employees having completed the orientation should be allowed to perform work related to the contract on any company worksite. Remember also that the depth and duration of the orientation varies with the scope of work and risks associated with the work. Again, a contractor coming in to put water bottles in your office is not going to need the same orientation as someone that's building a facility on your site. Normally, the safety orientations include 2 parts. One is the basic safety orientation, and the second is actually a site project specific orientation where you tour someone around the facility and show them things like your first aid room and the muster point. The required elements should cover all specific health and safety policies relevant to site and tasks assigned. These examples of these are mobile equipment policies, or certain areas are radio controlled. They need to be clearly communicated to contractors working on your site. We need to ensure that the contractors are informed of specific workplace hazards and emergency procedures, such as where is the marshalling point, what is the emergency evacuation procedure, and what are the horn signals. This next slide is a sample orientation, and again, the sample is on our website, and this is just a review form that the contractors read to ensure that they're familiar with all your site-specific rules. Again, this is on the Learning Center on our website. One thing I'd like you not to forget is the required elements for visitors. As you remember from the regulations, you're going to be responsible for everyone on your site. So people that come to visit should also be included with an orientation, and they should cover the health and safety policies relevant to your site visit. Ensure that the visitors are informed of specific workplace hazards, rules, and emergency procedures. And this includes things like the proper personal protective equipment available, things like rules around cell phones or radio usage in certain areas, and other sensitive items related to site-specific issues. This next slide is just a sample of a visitor orientation. Again, we've included the complete version on the website, and this just gives you an idea of how simple this is and how easy it is to complete. So, just a brief review of your contractor orientation. You want to make sure that you've confirmed understanding of orientation topics with documentation, including the date and signature of the people involved. You want to make sure that you've listed key items with your safety tour of first aid, smoking areas, washrooms, muster points, to ensure there is no miscommunication about where these items are located. So next, polling question. Does everyone understand the process for orientating contractors on site? I'll give you a minute to answer this one. Wow, that was fast. You guys are doing really good. Okay, let's move on to lesson 5. Coordinating contractor activities. In order to do this effectively, we need to have a designated person, and we need to clearly identify the duties of the person involved. In a lot of companies, this is the owner, but one of the most effective people to have in this designation is your maintenance coordinator. As a result, he is the one that usually organizes the contractors already. So this way, he's talking to the same people. These coordinators have the responsibility for contractor management. They need to ensure that all contractors meet the policy requirements. All contractors have been trained and orientated to your site. The documentation is completed and filed. This is one of the things that a lot of companies fall down on, is not orientating all of their employees. So again, it's very important that if someone's hurt on your site, that this documentation is in place to prove your due diligence. Next, are regularly inspected to ensure the compliance with company policy. And this is another duty of your coordinator. He needs to make sure that your contractors are following the tasks and maintaining compliance with work-safe standards. Anyone injured being out of compliance, someone's going to ask for these inspections. Lastly, you want to make sure that the contractors have met both their first aid and their joint occupational health and safety meeting requirements. And what I'm referring to here is that the contractor has site safety meetings and has appropriate first aid for the number of people and the hazard rating that the project demands. One of the key parts of this process is setting out expectations for your contractors before they come on site. Things like basic safety. If a contractor brings chemicals on site, he needs to understand that he has to provide safety data sheets so that everyone is familiar with the hazardous products on the site. Other examples of permits that he might need to fill out are things like hot work, confined space entry, or radiation. And for those that are not familiar with radiation, things like nuclear densometers for checking the compaction of soil or a radiation source. The contractor using these needs to follow the proper procedures and have the proper documentation in place. Incident reporting and investigations. All contractors need to know their obligations to report all incidents and investigate them. The contractors are responsible for investigating and correcting all incidents involving their employees and subcontractors under their direction. Often, a client representative should participate in the investigation to ensure that it meets the client's level of diligence. Remember, when you have contractors on your site, that you still are responsible to monitor and enforce your rules. So there needs to be a monitoring process to watch the contractor's activities, ensure his health and safety performance on site, and document the results of the monitoring activity. Earlier in the webinar series, we give you an example of a safety observation form. Again, this is an easy way to check on contractors and to record your observations and any non-compliances without taking a lot of time. On remote work sites, contractors can submit to you the records of their joint occupational health and safety meetings and their weekly site inspections for your approval. Any records of compliance or any near misses or incidents that have occurred. Remember that any non-compliance with the worksite health and safety requirements can result in a verbal or documented warning, and if necessary, removal of the contractor from the site. And again, this should be in your policy so that everyone is clear on you intend on enforcing these regulations and site policies. Once your project is complete, it's important to do an evaluation on your contractor. You need to evaluate the performance of the contractor both in the task involved and the health and safety performance of getting that task accomplished. Any non-compliance or areas of improvement should be noted for future contracts. Remember that when you're awarding future contracts, this evaluation could determine the eligibility for those contractors. On to lesson 5. This is a review of lesson 5, coordinating contractor activities. Remember that contractor orientation is a legal requirement. It is to be completed prior to the start of work, and that you need to carefully document the meetings, inspections, and training that take place as part of your due diligence. You want to make sure that you file this information in a secure location so it's not lost. Our next polling question: does everyone understand why contractors' activities need to be coordinated? And I'll give you a minute to answer that. Wow, everyone's on track today. Okay, let's move on to lesson 6, the OSSE requirements. So the key items for the audit are contractor selection requirements, including the registration with WorkSafe BC. There needs to be, contractors need to be managed to adhere to the regulations and site-specific requirements. There should be a designated coordinator to oversee contractor activities, and contractors are regularly inspected to ensure compliance with company policy. That's what the OSSE audit is looking for. In order to capture this element, we need to have documentation of these items. And this is your contractor selection requirements, including the registration with WorkSafe BC. This is documented, or there's an example of this in your contractor selection policy. You also need to have your contractor management regarding regulations. And again, this is in your policy and in your orientations. And next, we have the designated coordinator activities. These need to be documented as well, both in the orientations and in the inspections, joint occupational health and safety meeting presence, and any incidents that are involved with this particular contractor's project. Lastly, your auditor is probably going to check for some kind of inspection on your contractors. And again, the little form that I showed you earlier on safety observation will work in this category. Any questions?
Yes, Lauren, I got a question for you. Is the owner responsible for people that are not authorized to be on their site?
So this is a very good question. And what amounts to is people will dig a trench in their parking lot, and someone that's not intended to be on their site will walk by and step in it and break their leg. Are they going to be held responsible? And the answer is yes. So it's very key that everyone understands that you will be held responsible for anyone injured on your property as a result of any inaction that you have taken. And this could be barricading that trench. So again, I'd like you all to be cognizant of the fact that you will be held responsible for any injury on your site. Next one, Jarlath.
Is the homeowner responsible for contractors doing work on their home?
Okay, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but most of us have homes and most of us hire someone to fix your roof or change your gutters. The key part here is that you are responsible for your contractors. So if your worker or your contractor does not have WorkSafe BC coverage and falls off your roof, you can be held responsible. There's a couple solutions for this. One, make sure that the person hiring to work on your roof has WorkSafe BC coverage. And two, if he doesn't, you can purchase it quite cheaply through WorkSafe BC for a specific job, and in the neighborhood of $20 to $40 for the one small project of fixing your roof. But the key part is make sure you have coverage. If someone falls off the roof, the claim or the cost of that injury could be quite substantial, in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Next one.
Thank you, Lord. If you are held responsible for a contractor's injury, how long will it stay on your claim history?
Okay, so some of you are familiar with your employer planning toolkit, but some of you are not. The key part is if you are held responsible for a contractor that's injured on your site, it will take a minimum of 3 years to have it removed through the process. Normally your ratings are assessed on a 3-year rolling average, and it will take probably close to 4 years before it's off your stats. So you'll be paying for that injury in the neighborhood of 3 years for sure.
Okay. I've added 2 questions of my own, but I would like to open this up for everybody else to text in a question that if they would like to. Lauren, can visitors be escorted around and not have a full orientation?
You can do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend a truncated version of your visitor's orientation just to confirm the visitor's understanding of your policy. So even before you leave the office, you can simply say, Mr. Visitor, I'd like you to understand, this is our evacuation signal, this is where we're going to move to if we have an evacuation, and please sign here that they understand. Even though they will stay with one of your workers, they have a conception of what your emergency policies are, and you've documented that.
Okay.
Next one.
How does a company handle mom and pop shops when they don't have an OHS program themselves?
Okay, so if you're hiring a what we call a sole proprietor to do some work at your site, an example could be a window cleaner. What you need to take a look at is if they're a sole proprietor, they can refuse WorkSafe BC coverage if they choose to. The problem is they will be considered to be your employer or your employee while they're on your site. So the 2 ways of dealing with it are, 1, include the project cost in your WorkSafe BC assessment so that you pay WorkSafe BC premiums for them while they are on your site for the 1 or 2 days a year. The second thing is to not hire them. And as a result, you're not exposed to that liability. Do we have any more questions? I think that's good for today. I'd like to thank you for your participation today. And if you have any questions that come to mind later, feel free to send us an email. Hopefully you'll join us for our Element H program administration, and that should happen on May 17th. Have yourself a good day.